Hey guys, welcome to another Winemaker Wednesday. Some people believe that after they open a bottle of wine, their wine needs to breathe. Really? What does that mean? Does it actually help? We're going to talk about that today, so let's get to it. So let's start off with the basics. What does it mean to let your wine breathe? Well, it's really pretty simple actually. You pull the cork or pull the screw cap off and you're exposing the wine to oxygen, to ambient air. Ambient air is about 21% oxygen, so you're exposing the wine to oxygen. There's two things that begin to happen when you do that. The first is oxidation and the second is evaporation. So let's get into what those actually are. So first, oxidation. You probably all cut into an apple and you've seen it brown over time. Well, that's the process of oxidation, exposing things to air and they begin to oxidize. Rust is another form of oxidation. Well, wine can also undergo oxidation. However, in the typical time that someone would open a bottle and expose it to air, oxidation reactions would go very, very slowly and actually take hours or days to really oxidize a wine fully. In the minutes or even an hour or so that you expose a wine to air, the oxidation reactions are pretty minimal. So while it is definitely beginning to happen when you expose it to air, the oxidizing a wine to the point where you wouldn't want to drink it, it's very unlikely that that would happen. All right, so the next thing that's happening is evaporation, as I mentioned. Evaporation is the surface of the wine mixing with the ambient air. And typically it's volatile compounds that are evaporating off of the surface of the wine. Those volatile compounds can often be less desirable aromas and flavors that occur when a wine gets bottled up for a long time. So it can be a good thing to allow the wine to breathe, to let those volatile compounds evaporate off the surface of the wine. Okay, so something that's not happening, and this is a myth that's out there, but it's scientifically proven that wines do not soften when they get exposed to oxygen in the amount of time that we're talking about here, minutes to up to an hour, typical decanting time. So wines will not soften. So the myth is that you expose a wine to air and that the tannins will soften over time. For tannins to resolve themselves and soften takes months and years, and often is something that the winemaker's already taken care of in the winery by aging the wine in barrels for a long period of time, for months or years. So you opening the wine, aerating it in a decanter for a few minutes to 30 to 60 minutes is not going to soften those tannins. It's really just those volatile compounds that we just talked about evaporating from the surface of the wine and allowing the wine, the fruit characteristics of the wine to really show through versus the wine tannins actually softening. So that myth is busted. So next, let's talk about what wines actually benefit from breathing. White wines typically do not benefit from breathing. There are a few rare exceptions that we're not going to get into today, but a few rare exceptions where white wines might benefit from breathing or decanting. It's mostly red wines, and it's mostly young red wines that benefit from breathing. Think of a big, heavy-bodied red wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon, a Merlot, a Syrah, something like that. A big, heavy-bodied red wine will benefit from breathing by allowing those volatile compounds to evaporate and the wine breathing and opening up and allowing the fruit to really show through, given the exposure to oxygen. Okay, so we've talked about which wines you might want to let breathe. Let's talk about how to do it. Now, very simply, you can pull the cork or remove the screw cap and just let the wine sit on the counter and it will begin to breathe. A little more vigorous way or thorough way to do it would be to take that wine and pour it into a decanter, a glass decanter of pretty much any shape, but just the act of pouring that into a decanter will aerate the wine, will allow the wine to breathe. Let it sit there 15, 30, 45 minutes, and you have a wine that's been breathing. So that's the simple way to do it. Another way to do it is to use your glass. Again, open the bottle, pour some of the wine in the glass, and just let it sit on the counter for a bit, and you've allowed the wine to breathe and accomplished the exact same thing without a fancy, expensive decanter. So how long should you let your wine breathe for? Well, we've already talked that it's typically heavier bodied young red wines benefit from breathing. You might want to leave those a minimum of 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, maybe upwards of 60 minutes. And really that's up to you to taste and see your preference. And that's kind of the fun part of it, is to take a bottle of wine that you're pretty comfortable with, pour it in a glass, wait 15 minutes and taste that glass. Do it again, wait 30 minutes and taste that glass. Do it again, and if you can, wait 60 minutes and taste that glass and see which one you like best. It's a little trial and error. So now let's talk about a few of the other myths that are out there. The first one is that all wines need to breathe, and that is just not true. We've already talked about that. Young red wines with a heavy body typically are the wines that should be allowed to breathe. So myth number one, busted. Myth number two is that typically allowing your wines to age for a long time is always better. And that myth is just not true. We've also talked around somewhere between 50, 30, or even as long as 60 minutes, but really not much longer than 60 minutes is going to benefit a wine. Any longer than 60 minutes, and yes, the reactions are continuing to happen, but you're likely degrading the wine at that point. And honestly, who can wait 60 minutes after you open a bottle of wine? And the third myth is that only expensive wines can benefit from breathing. Now, this myth comes about because we've all seen in very fancy restaurants very expensive wines being decanted, while the less expensive wines are not. Now, it's just not true that only expensive wines can benefit from breathing. You can take an inexpensive, young, heavy-bodied red wine, Cab or Merlot, something like that, and allow it to breathe in a decanter for 15, 30, or 60 minutes, and it will benefit from that time in breathing, even if you paid less than $20 for that bottle. So that myth is busted. Any young, red, heavy-bodied wine could benefit from breathing. So what do we like to do at our house? Well, we always like to keep things really simple when it comes to wine. When we open up the bottle of wine, we'll pour a glass or two to get things started, and then we just simply leave the bottle open on the counter or even in the fridge if it's a white wine or a rosé to keep it cold. We don't go to the extra effort of getting a decanter out and pouring it into the decanter and exposing it to oxygen and waiting for it to breathe. We simply let it breathe in the bottle that it's in and enjoy it over the length of time that we're going to consume that bottle. That helps the wine open up and evolve or breathe. That's really the same process there. So that's kind of how we handle it. We just like to keep things simple around our house. All right, well, there you go. That's it. We've covered today how wines breathe, why you might want to let a wine breathe, which wines you should let breathe, and some of the myths around letting wines breathe. So hopefully you've learned a few things, and I really do encourage you to give it a try at home. Open up a wine that you're pretty familiar with, leave a glass on the counter for 15 minutes or so, come back and taste it. If you can, leave it on the counter for another 30 minutes, come back and taste it. And if you're really diligent, leave it on the counter for a full 60 minutes, come back and taste that same glass and see what you think. You might find that at 20 or 30 minutes, that's your sweet spot of where you like to let wines age or breathe. So give it a try at home. I encourage you to do that. Hopefully you like this video. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.